So, you're trying to manage some tricky stuff right now, and someone has suggested exploring compassion and maybe even self-compassion, but you're just not sure. You notice a few reservations have come up for you. Hi, my name is Dr. Stan Steindl, and I just wanted to talk a little bit now about the inhibitors of compassion and self-compassion, the things that can sometimes get in our way. So firstly, let's define compassion. Compassion is a sensitivity to suffering in self and others with a commitment to try to alleviate or prevent that suffering. And so this is the first important piece. It is about suffering. And so by all means, we should have certain questions or even reservations that arise when we think about what that means to actually approach suffering and do something to help. Firstly, certain fears of compassion might arise. What if compassion makes me weak or vulnerable? Or what if people will take advantage of me if I'm more compassionate? And equally, is self-compassion just itself a weakness? What if bringing more compassion to myself means that I'm more exposed to my own suffering and therefore things will just get worse? Secondly, we can sometimes experience certain blocks to compassion. I just don't know what to say or what to do to be compassionate. I'm not sure how I would actually find the time or the energy to be compassionate. Or with respect to being compassionate towards ourselves, maybe I feel like I just don't deserve any of that. Or I can be compassionate towards others, but I just shouldn't spend the time on myself. And thirdly, we often experience certain resistances to compassion. Compassion feels silly or even foolish, and really we're much better off being tough. With respect to being compassionate towards ourselves, that can feel too much like self-pity or self-indulgence, and we just don't want to be sitting around complaining about things all the time. So it's really common to experience these fears, blocks, and resistances regarding compassion and self-compassion. And so sometimes it can be useful to stop and reflect. What are my fears, blocks, and resistances? What might be getting in the way of compassion for me? It can be really useful to explore that and perhaps even start to work with those fears, blocks, and resistances in order to proceed and experiment with what it might be like to live a more compassionate life. Remember that these fears, blocks, and resistances probably stem from our evolved tricky brains and then got developed through certain experiences in life. For example, where do we learn to self-soothe? Well, we learn by having been soothed, and sometimes that can be tricky. We can have difficult experiences that makes soothing and self-soothing a complex kind of a function for us. So, if someone has suggested to you that you incorporate more compassion and self-compassion in your life, and yet you're feeling these reservations, these fears, blocks, and resistances have started to emerge, then that's perfectly reasonable, and in fact, it's not your fault. It's the way that our human brains work and get shaped by our experiences. The idea is to start to think, what might be some of the benefits of bringing compassion and self-compassion into my life? Might there be certain benefits to others? Might we be able to help alleviate the suffering or the difficulties or disappointments or discomforts that others might be experiencing? And secondly, might there be a benefit for me? Might I be able to bring my self-compassion and start to alleviate those same aspects of suffering? Perhaps you can just start small, just finding small ways to bring compassion into your day-to-day life, looking for small actions towards compassion for others, perhaps just smiling to a stranger in the street or sincerely thanking a shop assistant for helping you at the checkout. But also see if you can think of ways to bring small acts of self-compassion into your life, giving yourself small breaks when you really need it, noticing when you're feeling anxious and just starting to offer soothing words and soothing breaths. Just small things to experiment with bringing compassion in and what that might actually be like for you. And of course, I might just plant the little seed that sometimes we can look for opportunities to open ourselves up to receiving compassion from others. Now, this, of course, can come along with its own fears, blocks, and resistances. But it can be really important to just allow ourselves to experiment with and experience and gradually become comfortable with receiving compassion from others. Compassion and self-compassion are a little bit like trying on some new boots. We try them on, we walk around in them a little bit, they feel a bit awkward at first, even a bit uncomfortable, but gradually we can wear it in. And compassion and self-compassion is a bit like that. We start to wear it in, and it can start to actually feel very comfortable. In fact, we can really start to appreciate and enjoy having more compassion in our lives. So, thank you for watching this video. Have a think, what might be some of your fears, blocks, and resistances to compassion and self-compassion? And have a think also about what the benefits might actually be for you and for others around you if you were to have a more compassionate life. And finally, start to see if you can set some little goals, little compassionate action goals to actually incorporate into your daily life. So I'd be interested to hear if you have any comments. Just pop any comments down below, and good luck on your compassionate journey.